in this next hour together. So some things I'm going to go through fairly quickly because I want to make sure that we get through all of the content, but really get through how do we work through this grief. We're going to talk about how to understand it, what it is, what it isn't, but how do we work through grief in caregiving. Either this afternoon or tomorrow, I will send out a follow-up email. So you'll get a copy of these slides. So you can take notes, but know that you will get a copy of these slides. And there is going to be a lot of information on the slides. So, bear with us, but we want to make sure that you have all the information, and then we'll send that out to you. I am recording this. So in the next several days, we will download this program to our YouTube page. And we invite you to go to our YouTube page, view this program again, but also share it. We have over 100 different programs on our YouTube channel, I should say, of all of our past programs that we've done. And we hope that y'all use those as resources for you personally, or to share it with those that are also care partners with you in your journey too. It's a resource that we do. And then I will also send you a calendar of our upcoming programs. We have our program scheduled out through the end of May, so we'll make sure that you have that information also, and our support groups. So our support groups, we have 3 support groups that meet regularly. Holly, my colleague, who she is a licensed counselor, and probably most of you are familiar with her. She runs those support groups. So we have one that meets every Wednesday at 1 o'clock online. So after this, we have a support group meeting at 1 o'clock. And then every Friday at 11 a.m. in person at the West Center. We have that. And those are weekly. And then we have a group that meets once a month. It's the second Saturday of every month from 10:30 to noon. And that support group is specific to grief. So it is part of the journey of loving somebody and being a care partner, the grief that comes along with that. But that particular support group focuses on grief. It meets once a month. It's longer, it's an hour and a half. It's more heavy, and then she also gives you homework. So it's a working support group, if you will, to really, like I said, you can work through this grief. And that's the important part about this. I think one of the big takeaways I want you to hear today is that grief is not something that you check the box off and you do and it's over. Right? Grief is with us throughout our lives for a variety of losses that we have. And there is a difference between moving on and moving forward. So we want to really focus on how do I move forward with this grief, particularly as it sees on the screen here, this ambiguous and anticipatory grief. When I'm caring for and loving somebody that has dementia, I know that I am losing them over time. This is different than a conventional grief, which typically happens after the death of somebody, because I've been losing my loved one over time and losing other things that come along with that. So naturally, there's going to be grief. And how do we work through this? And how do I move forward with this grief instead of moving on? And we'll talk more about that, but I think the overarching goal is how do I move forward with this in a healthy manner? Briefly, the James L. West Center, if you're not familiar, we have been serving persons impacted by dementia for 31 years now. We have a variety of services that we offer. Our main location is in Fort Worth, Texas, and we have a long-term care community that is specific for people with dementia. We have a short-term rehab that is dementia specific. So those that might have dementia but might have broken a hip or need to go to rehab, we have a place and very specialized therapists that know how to work with people with dementia and go through rehab and therapy and then get them back to home or wherever they may be. We have a day program as well, and this is a dementia-specific day program for those that are in the early to mid stages of the disease that still want to do the socialization and be involved in their community, go and contribute, be around people that are just like them, and then the caregiver gets respite. They continue to work, they get their rest as well. And that is a underutilized but fantastic program that we have at the James L. West Center. And then, of course, our education that you're taking advantage of right now. This free education is our gift back to the community for families, no matter families and healthcare professionals or people that are just curious about how do I be a good care partner where I'm at. And we have people from all over. That's one of the great things about being online, is you can be anywhere and take advantage of our education and resources and the support groups I mentioned just a second ago. So Rosalind Carter, this is a quote from her, and I think it is so true. But there are 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And you might be in one of those stages right now. You might be in all 4 of those, or have been in all 4 of those. But that is so true. Caregivers are the backbone to the healthcare system, but just to having good quality of life. I need somebody to care for me when I need that. And then vice versa. Am I a good caregiver to those that I love and that are in my life as well? But being a caregiver has a lot of rewards. It has a lot of self-fulfillment. There's a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of heartache that can come along with caregiving too. And that's what we'll talk about today. So we'll talk about specifically, there are several different types of grief, but we're going to talk specifically about ambiguous and anticipatory grief. And these are very normal, common griefs that come along with caregiving for somebody with dementia or a chronic illness. We're going to define what is grief, what is loss, what is mourning, what is bereavement, what does all that look like, but then really dive into, well, how do I work through this in a healthy way so I can continue to be the best caregiving partner, best spouse, best sibling, best coworker, all of those things that I can be. So grief, what is it? It is a natural reaction to something, or a natural reaction to when we have a loss of any sort. A lot of the times, particularly in our society, we think grief, well, their grief happens after somebody has died or passed away. But grief comes after any loss that we have in our lives. And this can be the loss of a job, a career, somebody that we love, a relationship, a dream, a future, personal items, the health, a loss of health. I mean, you name it, it's a loss that we've had. And I ask you, just think back in your past life. Think about the first loss that you had. And so go back into your childhood, and this might have been the loss of, a pet that you might have lost that you remember. Maybe you moved, maybe your parent got another job, so you had to move. So maybe you lost some friends that you had in the neighborhood or the school that you had. But think back to that first loss, and then, how we reacted, what happened with that loss, and how that shapes us. From each loss that we have and we perceive, it shapes who we are, right? It shapes how we move forward. It also shapes us on how we deal with the loss that comes along with it. How do we deal with that? I'm going to talk about it more towards the end, but there is this emotional hygiene. We were taught at a very young age, hygiene, personal hygiene. How do I take care of myself? Brushing my teeth, cleaning my body, getting my hair, cleaning my hair, all that personal hygiene taught. But are we really ever taught emotional hygiene? How do I take care of my emotions? What am I supposed to do when I have a loss? What's the healthy thing to do and not so healthy? A lot of the times how we learn that is we see how other people do it in our environment. Good, bad, and ugly we see, and that's how we would pick up on, well, that's what we're supposed to do when there's a loss. Whether it's we're not supposed to talk about it, or we really dive headfirst into it, or maybe it's how do I comfort myself when there's a loss? It might be going to grab a drink, or getting something to eat, or going to sleep. We kind of see this and we pick up on it, and that's how we generally learn how to do emotional hygiene. But we're going to learn some healthy ways on how to do emotional hygiene, or maybe tweak ways how we do it. But grief is it's an experience of a loss. It's a natural reaction to it. And I love this. It's right there in bold, but grief is a form of love. Tears often take the place of words, and there is an act of love and healing through grief. So I want us to kind of start to reframe how we look at grief. and knowing that this is love and it's an act of healing and it is healthy and it's needed for not just me to work through this grief, but also to those that I love and I care for. Mm-hmm. It's learning to live with the loss. Mm-hmm. So we want to mourn the loss, but also be open to new opportunities, new relationships, new situations that can happen, but mourning that loss. Mm-hmm. If grief has nowhere else to go, or we don't work through grief, or we bottle it up, or we set it to the side, or we push it down, grief will start to show up in physical manifestations. So it's not something we can ignore, at least not for forever, and not without consequences. And we'll talk more about that, but this is something that we absolutely have to do, or it will start to show up in other ways that are not so healthy. But please know that there is no end to grief. There's no timetable. There's no right way or wrong way to grieve. And for each loss that you have in your life, your grief's going to look a little bit different. Okay. But the goal is to adapt to the loss and make it part of who we are. It's not to forget it or to move on from it or to get over it. It's to make it part of who we are. You know, it says down here, you may feel better in a few weeks. It may feel better in a few months, a few years, but it takes a long time to work through it. It is a process to work through it. It's not just kind of a one and done thing. Mm-hmm. And it can be a long process depending on the loss. And also be set expectations that you'll have setbacks during your process. You might take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but then you take 5 steps forward, you know, and then there might be another setback. And that's just part of grief and loss. And it's normal and it's to be expected. So loss is the fact of losing something or someone or a relationship or a future, but there's physical, emotional, spiritual, social, and economical harm and damage. It can be losing a possession of something. It can be deprivation from separation, but there is a loss there. And loss is, so there's so many different types of losses. It's not just death is what we typically think of, but there's losses that we have. Excuse me. And I want to do a quick exercise with you all, and kind of honor system that you do it, but I'm going to give you a minute. And I want you to think about the losses that you have right now, in particular to caregiving, the losses that you might have felt during caregiving. And we're going to come to seeing some examples here shortly, but I want you to start thinking about those. What's some of the losses that you're experiencing in your caregiving journey? You know, is it a loss of a relationship? Was it a loss of a job? What about some financial losses? What about the future looks different? The future I planned, I may not have that anymore. You know, so just kind of start thinking about those losses. And this is a healthy exercise to go through, okay? To start thinking about those. Let me give you a second just to kind of get our thinking about what are these. Take a second. Okay, you might have started writing them down or just starting to kind of thinking those through. And we're going to come back to that in a second, but this is part of working through this grief and loss. So mourning, you know, mourning is part of our grief experience, but it's our expression. It's our action of the loss and the grief that we have. And it can involve rituals that we do. It is the great sadness. It's how we express our sadness and from the loss that we have. That's what mourning is. Those are kind of the differences between loss, grief, mourning, and what it is. It's that external expression. And what we do, it might be lighting a candle, it might be prayers, it might be meditations, it might be the funeral, it might be writing letters to those that we lost, but it's those acts of sadness that we have. And then there is sadness, and sadness covers a whole spectrum of feelings. Okay, it's being sorrowful, it's being unhappy, but it can go to the other extreme. There's just from disappointment of sadness, you kind of see on the screen there, all the way up to despair and anguish. And then everything that's in between that. These are all manifestations of sadness that come from our loss. But as we look at these, these feelings that we all have, and they're all universal feelings, we all know what it feels like to be disappointed, to feel distraught, to have discouragement, despair, hopelessness, overwhelming sadness. We all know what those feelings feel like. We've all experienced those. How we've come to those, might look a little bit different, right? But we all understand. We all know what it feels like. So these are universal feelings. And it serves as a reminder that we need help, that we need comfort, that we do love, and that we can move through this grief. So looking at these feelings, while they are difficult, for lack of a better word, to experience and go through, they're needed and they're important, and we should be grateful for these feelings. I think, as we work through this, I'm grateful for the sadness that I have, because that also means I have comfort. Where can I seek this comfort? That I need help, and that I did love, and I do have this loss because I've had this great experience of something that I had before the loss. And then their bereavement. Bereavement is that period of time when we are grieving. Okay, it's that period of mourning. It's a normal process, this bereavement period. All of these are normal. The bereavement, the mourning, the sadness, the grief, all the things that we talked to. This is just a natural reaction to what our losses are and the grief that we're going through. But the psychological response of those who've suffered significant loss in their life and their ensuing grief is the bereavement. It's this period that they go through, or that you're going through. And of course, bereavement might be a long road, particularly as you're caregiving for somebody with dementia, because you're losing stuff. You continuously lose things over time. So the bereavement period of this is going to extend, but it's normal. And we're going to, of course, talk through how do I work in this bereavement period. I want to take a second to talk about depression, because depression and grief go hand in hand, right? Depression is a common, but a very serious medical issue, or illness, I should say, that does affect how we feel emotionally. It affects how we think. It affects how we behave. And it does it generally in a negative way. Those feelings of depression or despondency, hopelessness, dejection. It can happen at any age. It often happens in adults, and it often happens when we experience loss. So there's a loss and depression go hand in hand, because I've lost something and I'm grieving and I'm going through this bereavement period and I'm mourning. So this is not a normal reaction to any type of loss that we have. What the symptoms of depression look like, and we have these up there because sometimes the symptoms of depression are misunderstood on what they are, but it can be that there is persistent sadness, or there's just this empty mood, or maybe I don't have, maybe I don't really feel anything, and it's been a while that I felt anything. I'm flat. I have this flat feeling. That can be disturbing, right? Or you're like, I don't think this is normal, but it is normal. Like, you can have that empty mood. Maybe you're having a hard time with concentration. Your attention span is short. You're having a hard time getting through activities, or you lose kind of your train of thought and you can't get it back. Or you're right in the middle of activity, you get very easily distracted and you don't come back to it because you don't remember, or you don't remember where you were at. You can have a significant decrease or increase in appetite, in sleeping. Maybe you are more dependent on some of your coping skills that aren't so helpful. Maybe it might be you're eating more comfort food, you're drinking that extra glass of wine, maybe you're sleeping longer, you're taking more pain pills just to help you through. You might have heightened feelings of anxiety, isolation, negativity, pessimism. I mean, you see all of these things appear. Irritability, you're just much more irritable, quick to anger, feeling restless. You might have more decreased feelings of activity, or your activity is decreased or it's increased. So you have hyperactivity, or you don't have any activity, you're exhausted all the time, or you're restless and you can't stop moving, can't stop, right? You might even see it show up in physical symptoms of, excuse me, docs hear about just aches and pains. I just ache all over. My muscles ache, my head aches, my stomach, my digestive system is not working well. So you can see it manifest physically in us as well. And I have these up here just to know, it's like, okay, and not look at these to be scared of them, but it's okay, I am experiencing these symptoms. Is it the depression that's due to a loss that I'm having? So it's looking at these and being, okay, I have these feelings. I'm quick to anger. I am feeling more achy all the time. I have a lot more anxiety than I typically do. Okay, so these symptoms can be a manifestation of depression that I'm having due to the loss. Okay. Well, we're going to learn how to work through some of this, but that's, this is a normal reaction. I want you to know the feelings that we have due to loss and grief are normal. It's okay to not feel okay, right? So we have these up here, and I want you to read that first bullet point and really understand this, but all depression can be treated. 80 to 90% of depression can be cured. And the other 20%, 10%, they will see a reduction in their symptoms. Okay. So it's not that depression can't be fixed, right? Or it can't be, I shouldn't say it can't be treated, because it can be treated. Or we can alleviate the symptoms of it. But we have to work at it. Okay. And we got to work on it pretty earlier. So if I start to notice these symptoms and I was like, oh, okay, I need to talk to the doctor about this because they might be symptoms of depression. What treatment can I start pretty early on so I can start to feel better? And as you talk to your doctor, a trusted doctor about it, there should be a combination of treatments that show up. They might prescribe some medication to help you through this, but also alternative treatments as well, whether it's getting involved in a support group, it's upping exercise, it might be changing the diet, it might be getting out in nature more. There are a lot of it might be going to talk therapy to talk through and find some coping skills that you might not know that you had, or you need to hone in or sharpen, that you get from somebody that's trained to help to do that. But know that depression affects us all differently. And it might be a different time in our lives that and the depression is affecting us differently as well. But there's not a one size fits all treatment, and it might be some trial and error. Let's try this for a while, see how it works. And then we might need to tweak the treatment, in a couple of months, see how you're doing and tweak it from there to find really what works best for me. But know that there is treatment, because depression can be treated and those symptoms can be alleviated. Either they go away or they're really the reduction in those symptoms. You'll see a dramatic reduction in your symptoms. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing more difficult than grieving the loss of a loved one who is still alive. So we're going to talk about ambiguous grief and anticipatory grief, and then what do I do with those? How do I work through them? In ambiguous grief, it's a loss without the finality that leaves us. It can leave us disoriented. It can leave us not understanding, well, how am I supposed to move forward when my loved one is still here? And there's some unanswered questions. There's a change in the relationship. There's a change in functioning, it's ambiguous as it's open to interpretation, or having a double meaning. It's ambiguous. There's really not a black or white answer to it. Right? The picture here, if you look at that image on the left side of your screen, do you see a duck or do you see a rabbit? Can you see both? Now that you say it. And that's where that ambiguous grief comes in. Ambiguity. It's where I have dual emotions. I see both. And it can be confusing. But this is normal. This is a normal part of being a caregiver for somebody with dementia for sure. And you've experienced a significant loss in your relationship. The person that you love, that you're caring for, is still alive, but you're also losing parts of them over time, or losing roles that they've played in your life. It can be from divorce, infertility. There might be mental health issues, addiction. We see a lot of ambiguous grief in veterans from Vietnam War. Okay, they come home, they went to war, and they come home and weren't treated so great. We see it in those that have lost somebody that are missing in action, because it's not answered. Are they alive? Are they not? Where are they? Where could they be? So there's that unanswered stuff as well. We see a lot of people that are caring for somebody with dementia, because without that physical death or that finality of something, we can become consumed, thinking that life might return back to normal. They might come home. They might get cured. They might. So we don't have that closure that we so desperately want, right? With ambiguous grief, it can be, come from a situation, an event, like a divorce, right, or a diagnosis of some sort. But it can come with a sense of shame or embarrassment. Again, there's those unanswered questions, and we might take it on as a personal failure, or there's some stigma around it. We might start to blame ourselves for whatever reason, or could I have prevented it? If I would have done something differently, we might not be here today. I might not be having these feelings. Okay, our brain tries to search for these logical answers, and sometimes we can become stuck in a place. However, this is a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. I'm going to say that again. It is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation to have these feelings of ambiguous grief. Another example down here is a parent is embarrassed that their child is an addict. Okay, so there might be some, the embarrassment from that, embarrassment from an affair within the relationship, or embarrassment that my loved one has dementia and they're not able to care for themselves, or they're acting differently out in public and among our friends. And that can be hard. That can be embarrassing and hard. Another thing that happens is we haven't necessarily publicly acknowledged the pain. When there's a death, there's kind of rituals that we go through, right? We reorganize family roles. We know that, mom might not be around anymore, so we kind of mold ourselves into roles that we need to do to fill in, the role that mom, the missing role that mom had, right? We take over what that person used to do. But now we're having to take over, in the case of somebody with dementia, we're having to take over, but they're still here, right? They're still alive. And, and we teach they can still do most things. How do we continue to keep them? How do we keep normalization and keep their dignity and their, and enhance their quality of life? But also, how do we reorganize as well? Then they're still here. We might not know how to talk about it. We might not know how to express our feelings, because we might have dual emotions, right? And we might be afraid to talk about it to other people that don't quite understand, because we do have dual emotions. So we might not talk about it at all, and then we might not get the support that we need. And this is where support groups, specific support groups come in so handy, because you can talk about these emotions that are confusing, that are dual emotions, but you're talking about them with people that understand, because they're in the same situation. They're caregiving for somebody with dementia. So you are able to talk about it in a safe space, in a non-judgmental space, so you're going to receive the support that you need, as opposed to not talking about it at all, or saying, I can't talk to my kids about this because they sure won't understand. And they might not. It might not be an appropriate place to talk about it, but I can go to the support group and talk about it and get that support and that therapy. And this is how I'm starting to work through this grief and these ambiguous feelings. Some families can say these are private family matters. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it outside of the family, and we really don't talk about it inside the family either. So, are we, by not talking about it, are we preventing others from not talking about it or expressing their emotions or supporting them as well? And not only supporting my own healing, but everybody else's healing as well. So I asked you earlier to start to think about the losses that you've experienced as a caregiver. or experiencing. And these are a list of some of those losses that, we've asked over the years from caregivers. What list some of those things, list of those roles that our loved one has that maybe that we're not experiencing, or that we've lost that role that they have. It could be, they were my friend. I lost a spouse, I lost a parent, but my friend, the gardener, the mechanic, business partner, right? My playmate, I lost my sibling, the person that paid the bills, who did all the finances. I lost that person. Lost the cook. Lost a lover. The handyman. Who am I going to call now when something breaks? Right? My confidant. My reminder. We had a lady just recently. She said, my husband was the one that was reminding me. Have you taken your pills today? Do you need to go? When was the last time you went to the doctor? Have you called your sister recently? He was the reminder for her, and she's lost that. Predictability. Life can be fairly predictable for some people. I know what's going on. I kind of know how the week's going to go. It's predictable. And we've lost that. One family caregiver said she's like, I lost my husband's personality. That's what made me fall in love with him, is his personality. And now that's not there anymore. So I've lost that personality. And we lose these, and we grieve these losses, right? We grieve the ones that are more obvious, that they're not able to drive anymore. They're not able to maybe feed themselves without assistance, right? Those are losses too. But then there are these other ones that really can take us by surprise. And it's healthy to write down these losses and these roles that you have. Because when I start to write it down, I can put it on paper. I can start to name it. I can start to tame the emotions that come along with it, and I can start to work through it and move forward. So please, if you have a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes or something, to sit down and write down these things. Really, let's think about this, think through this. It's a good exercise, therapeutic. And then, of course, we'll leave you with how to work through this afternoon. So this is a feelings wheel. And I have it up here. I said this earlier, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to have abnormal feelings in abnormal situations, right? It's okay. That's normal. Normal to have abnormal feelings in abnormal situations. But this feeling wheel that you can see is sometimes we might be feeling angry about something. But where does that really come from? It's diving down into more, well, what am I so angry about? I might be really angry about the fact that my husband can't be the handyman anymore. I don't have anybody to call when something breaks. And now I'm having to find somebody, and I don't even know who to go to first. And that becomes really angry. And I'm angry about it. But then as I'm diving deeper into it, I'm mad. I'm frustrated. It's irritating. But then it's also that's that loss. I'm angry that I'm having to find somebody, but it's because I've lost that handyman that I always could just easily call. And acknowledging that, okay, that's a loss that I have, and I need to work through that grief. So this feelings wheel is just, if you've not seen one, maybe we need to be reminded of it. This is what the many emotions that come. When we're feeling joyful or scared or peaceful or sad, what all does that look like? Sad can look really bored, but I also just might feel inadequate. Those are all feelings that stem from sadness. And it's helpful to know this because I can work through it a little bit better when I can name it, when I can actually identify it a little bit better. But here's some ways to cope. How do I cope with grief? And I've mentioned a couple of these already, but talk to a trusted counselor. I mentioned it, if I can name it, I can tame it. If I can name that emotion, then I can start to tame it. If I can write down these losses and the feelings that come along with it, okay, I can start to tame it. I can start to work through this because I know what I'm working through. It's helping me through that ambiguity of this, right? Support groups are huge. Know that it takes time. There is no timetable. It's a long journey, particularly when we're caring for somebody with dementia, okay, because we're having these losses over time. So it's a long journey. And you might think, I've worked through and I've moved forward from this loss a couple of months ago, but this week we had another loss, and it might have triggered the loss that I thought that I worked through. And maybe you did work through it, but it just came up. It's another loss that we had this one, and it's going to trigger that. So you might have some emotions again from a past loss that are coming through. And that's very normal. And we just work through those feelings. Exercise helps with all of this. So when we can make good lifestyle choices, whether it's exercise, getting good sleep, staying social, staying connected to those trusted friends and families and other confidants that I can talk to in a safe space. I got to keep those connections going. I make good choices through my diet. That helps us work through grief. It really does. It just absolutely does. We want to focus on the good times, celebrate the good times. There is a lot of joy in caregiving. There's a lot of reward. I think there's more reward than there isn't, but a lot of times we just have to look for it because we might be so tired, or we might just be in the middle of a more intense grieving season that I really want to pull out and look at. Well, what's good about this? What great things happened today? Even though there were some sad things, what were some great things that happened too? Be patient with yourself. So we want to find grace in everything that we do. We ask you have grace for your loved one, but do you have grace for yourself? If you were sitting across the table from your best friend that was going through this, what advice would you give them? Would you tell them, you need to have grace? You need to know that this is going to take time. You got to have grace because we're human beings. Other ways that you can memorialize your loss. Can you express your loss? That act of mourning. Is it a letter that you write? Can it be, we had a lady that her husband passed, and it came up to their first anniversary, since his passing, their wedding anniversary. And she didn't want to acknowledge it at first, but she knew better. She knew that was not the way to work through grief. So she got her kids with her and said, I want to go visit the gravesite. I want to do that. And I want to spend some time alone with him at the gravesite and do my thing. But then I want to go to the restaurant that we always went to on our wedding anniversary. And that's part of my memorializing it. And it's holding on to that tradition. It looks different, right? Because he's not there, but it's holding on to that. It's knowing that I'm moving forward with him there. So we're going to continue to, so it might be something like that. That you do. How do I tap into these positive emotions? And it's finding meaning in what you're experiencing. Giving yourself grace, but what's the meaning out of what I'm experiencing? And maybe it's just the meaning and you have it with yourself, but it might be something that you're able to share with others too. So writing a letter of release. This is, maybe I need to write a letter saying goodbye. And it might be specific to that role. I might have to say goodbye to that handyman, or I might have to say goodbye to what I thought retirement was going to look like. And now I bet I have a new retirement. I have a new future. And what does that look like? And we release those words to a higher power, to a God, to the higher universe, and we release what that is. And building resilience. And this goes back to that gratitude list. What are those good things I can look for each day? And it might be every day you write down 3 things that went well during the day. And practicing this daily, taking attention to practice this, it'll start to become naturally part of just how you start to think. So you'll have a more positive outlook on things. So it helps you reframe your mind as opposed to more negative, because I'm going to see more of the positive. When I start to really look, I'm going to see more positive things that are going on. It takes time. All right. So we're moving forward. We're not moving on. We're moving forward. It does take time. And know that there's no timeline. You'll have it for forever. It does get easier, but you'll have it for forever. The only way to move forward is to feel the hard feel the hard feelings, work through the grief, and replace the need to understand with a commitment to move forward. Because you might not understand, why me? Why is this happening? What the hell's going on? But I can move forward, and I'm committed to moving forward. And it might be writing that commitment down. It might be a form of helping you work through this. Write down that commitment. I am committed to moving forward. Today, on April 3rd, at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm committed to moving forward today. And you have to write down that same commitment tomorrow. Or you might need to do it next week. But that's a way to start moving. Celebrate, again, what remains. Be open to a new type of relationship. Again, it's mourning the loss, but being open to new opportunities. Understand that the illness isn't the person. So a lot, I might have to really educate myself on what this illness is and what it isn't. A lot of treatment and healing and understanding comes through just educating ourselves. And it might be, well, I know about the disease, but I might not know so much about what stage my loved one's in and what to expect. So maybe I need to learn more about this particular stage or this particular expression that they're having. So just educating ourselves and finding meaning again in what you're experiencing. You may be meeting new people. The best thing that we say is you're developing a skill set that you probably never wish you had, but you've got this skill set now. And it's a skill set a lot of people do not have. So you should be proud of yourself, kind of take that on and own it. And then how do I take the skills that I now have and better others around me and better myself? It allows us to make sense of the pain. It allows us to make sense of this loss and this grief and help us move forward, but also help others cope and move forward as well. So it is moving through. Grief is moving forward and moving through the feelings. The pain there are two types of pain in the world: pain that simply hurts you and pain that inspires you to grow. So you can use this pain, the grief and the loss, for you to grow. But you've got to look at it as an opportunity to do that, because you can look at it as this just hurts and it sucks. And it does hurt and it does sucks, but I can grow from it. So anticipatory grief, this is the grief that happens prior to the actual loss. So we're grieving the loss before it happens. We're absorbing a gradual loss. We're beginning to prepare for the inevitable because we know it's coming. Okay, common. This is very common in those that are caregiving for somebody that have a terminal illness, but it's also common in those that are experiencing that terminal illness as well. Or they have their own. They know that their death is imminent, and they're cognitively aware they can experience this anticipatory grief also. We are most familiar, I've mentioned it, with what the grief that happens after death, that conventional death, and we kind of know what to do. We know conventional death. I said we organize into roles. We know the rituals that we do in our Western society. There's the funeral, there's the food that's brought afterwards, we kind of rally around that family. We know what to do, but we might not know what to do with this anticipatory grief. And we're sometimes hesitant to express the feelings of it. With ambiguous grief, there's those dual emotions. It's the same with this anticipatory grief. And it's these painful feelings of loss and grief that we have before the death. And other people might not understand what that looks like, except for those that are going through the same thing or have been in the same situation. So again, we might not seek out support because we might not know how to express these feelings, or we might feel embarrassed by these feelings, or we might not know that anybody would understand the feelings. It can look like with anticipatory grief, there's more anger. We have more irritability. We're not as in control of our emotions. And there might be more atypical grief responses. So there might be more numbness, more apathy, more sorrow, a lack of trust in others. Because there is that, I'm holding on to my loved one that's still here, but I also have to let go because there are losses and there are changes that need to happen, right? But my loved one's still here and I want to hold on to them. So said 40% of women said that anticipatory grief was worse than the post-loss grief that happens. because there's that duality that we are experiencing. So some symptoms. So what are the symptoms here? It's the loss upsets the usual routine of our lives, but there are physical, emotional, spiritual, social, behavioral symptoms that we experience, and they can come through and look like sadness and tears, and it can come on suddenly. All of a sudden, I might be in the grocery store looking at the oatmeal, and I just get hit with a wave, and I can't stop crying. Something triggered it, and it just comes on. It's unexpected. But these unexpected moments of sadness and tears help prepare for the loss. It's a normal reaction to the anticipatory loss that we're experiencing. Again, you might have more feelings of anger or fear, irritability. And this comes in from, well, I need to educate myself about the disease. And I had to educate myself about what to expect as the disease progresses, at least as much as I can. Then we have the loneliness and depression that we will experience. And a lot of times we don't talk about it because, again, fear of others won't understand. I may not know how to express it myself, right? But if you don't talk about it to somebody that's trusted or in a support group, again, this grief will start to show up and manifest in physical manifestations later on down the road. We might have resentment, and it's not resentment towards our loved one, it's resentment towards a disease that we have no control over. And that can lead to guilt because, we look at our loved ones and we might have resentment, but it's not my loved one I have resentment for, it's the disease, or it's the anger I have towards the disease, not my loved one. But I need to be able to see that because I don't want to start having guilt because I think I'm angry at my loved one. That's not it. It's the disease, it's the situation. So, but we've got to enlist people in our lives, the support groups, those that we trust, our confidants, to help us work through these emotions, but also continue to live your life outside of being that caregiver. You might have more feelings of anxiety because we're just kind of, it's anticipatory. We have this heightened sense or heightened state of, well, when is it going to happen? When's the next loss going to happen? Because I know it is. I'm anticipating it. I know this, right? So when is it? What is it going to look like? So we might have more anxiety symptoms show up. And then there's survival guilt. The guilt and then there's survival guilt. So these dual emotions of, wishing our loved one would go ahead and pass. And it's not that we want our loved ones to go ahead and pass. We want our loved ones to be free of this disease. We don't want them to live with this disease anymore. And then we might ask, well, how long is this going to take? Why isn't this over yet? And it's not, I need this to be over. It's, I want this disease. I want everybody to be free of this disease. And then that survival guilt is that you'll continue on with your life when they won't. I had a caregiver say, I feel like I'm building my life without them. And you're not. You're not building your life without them. You are building a life with them because you're moving forward and you're bringing them along with you in the way that they can. And then you also might find yourself heightenedly concerned about things. Kind of, very similar to anxiety, but I might be very concerned about something, their health, or they've got a hangnail, and we might hone in on that one little tiny thing because it's something I can control. In this disease that I can't control, I can control that hangnail, or I can control the diet that they have and the food that they eat, these little things, and I might really become obsessed with those little things because I can control it. And you might find yourself doing that. Again, it's a normal symptom because of the anticipatory grief. You also might find yourself rehearsing death. And what is that going to look like? And that's a very normal part of this. And it's accepting that the death is inevitable. You might experience physical problems, but then the fear of loss, what will happen when the actual physical death does happen? What will the future hold for me? And thinking about it is a part of this grief, that it would be a symptom that comes up for it. It comes up from the anticipatory grief. But look at these benefits of it. Anticipatory grief gives us the opportunity to have important conversations, to talk about, to spend that quality time with our loved one, have forgiveness. Are there people we need to call and talk to? Can we let go of guilt and anger and find closure? We can make plans for the future. We can. What does the legacy look like for our loved ones? How do I create more moments of joy? How do I bring in family and friends that they can enjoy this time with my loved one as well? Because we have this opportunity, we have this time. How do I make it the best that I can while they're still here? Is there any unfinished business that needs to happen? And it goes beyond writing a will or, going through the estate. We do want to make sure all that stuff is taken care of. But does it go beyond that? Again, are there things that need to be said before somebody dies? Are there people that need to be contacted before somebody dies? It's making peace. And this is great for you, but it's also extremely therapeutic for your loved one. Even if they're in the late stages of dementia, they're still going through that life review in the way that they can. So we need to also give them permission to do this, to go through this life review, whether it's you, whether it's your loved one, it might be other family members that are doing it, but to go through that and give them permission. With your loved one that's doing this, they're probably experiencing anticipatory grief also in the way that they can. We're losing our relationship with our loved one, and they're losing all their relationships. So through their journey of their dementia, they're going through this grief also, an ambiguous grief as well. It can be overwhelming. They may not fully understand, just like you don't fully understand sometimes the grief feelings that we have, but they may not as well. And that can manifest in some expressions and things. And showing grace for them, like we would want to show for ourselves. But it can also allow a lot of time for meaning and closure and allow them to work through the grief in their time in a way that they're going to work through the grief, but providing those opportunities. It might be calling somebody up on the phone. It might having people come and visit. And it also looks like giving them permission to do this, giving them permission to go. Know that they've led a good life and that you're going to be okay without them. The grief before death does not take place or does not replace the grief after death. So there will be great grief when the physical death happens. It'll look different, and it might be happening, or it might happen later than expected or what you think, but it doesn't replace it. This anticipatory grief does not replace the grieving that happens after death, but it will look different because you've grieved a lot of the loss already. It doesn't shorten the grieving process. It just is going to look different, and the timetable might look a little bit different as well than what you might expect it, or what you have experienced in the past with other deaths that you've lived through. And it's not a substitute for grief either, okay? But it does help provide closure that maybe a sudden death wouldn't, or a quick death wouldn't. So that's a benefit of this. So quickly, the 5 ways to cope with our anticipatory grief is to reframe the situation. Are we viewing the glass half full, or are we viewing it half empty? Are we looking at it? Again, we want to mourn the loss, but what are the benefits of this? I have this time, and I can use journaling, I can use therapy, I can use music to help them through their grief. I can help my loved one through their grief journey. It helps me as well, but I have this time. Can we go through photos? Can we look at all this past, all the great memories that we've had together, and use this to help us both work through this grief? There's the opportunity to try and do something about the loss. Are there other alternative treatments that we might want to seek out while we can? I would even say it's a treatment, but how do I enhance the quality of life? What are these things I can do to enhance the quality of life? And it might be getting help from outside that frees me up to get that relationship back as a spouse or a sibling or a child. Or is it incorporating more nature? How do we just really enhance this quality of life because we have this time and we have the opportunity to seek out these other options? trying to control one's own reactions to the situation. So how do we look for those meaningful experiences? And many studies have shown that if we have more religious or spiritual kind of outlook on it, or we start to incorporate more spiritual or religious outlooks in this time of our lives, it helps us with more closure. It helps us leave legacies that we might not have worked through otherwise. It does help with planning funerals, and this is what we want after death and at end of life. It helps us say goodbye. But there it says, research shows that people who are dying experience a better quality of life in the last few days if they have an active spiritual life. And that's going to look different for each person. But how do we, in that spiritual life, it's this higher power, this greater purpose of me. So how do we incorporate that into how do I cope with this grief for myself and for my loved one? Goodbyes are not forever. Goodbyes are not the end. They simply mean I'll miss you until we meet again. By Anonymous. But it kind of goes back to how do we reframe some of this as well. And having this spirituality or this connection to a higher power helps us reframe, but it also helps with that quality of life. And then counseling and support groups that I've mentioned this several times. There is such a thing as complicated grief if we are not able to move through this grief for a variety of reasons. It's intense grief. Maybe it's bringing up past grief that we never worked through. But it can happen when the usual response to the death of a loved one does not fade over time, or it impairs us and our ability to function from day to day for us to lead a normal life. Okay, so you might see it in episodes of rage. I'm not able to focus on anything but the death or the impending death. I have intense emptiness to where it's just helplessness and hopelessness, and to where there might be thoughts of suicide. And this is not common, but it's not uncommon. So it's something to be aware of. And this is where we just need to talk to somebody that's a counselor or that's trained to help us identify, why am I having complicated grief? And what are the best ways for me and the coping skills I need to develop to work through it? I will say, if you are having thoughts of suicide or actions in any way, then you must talk to somebody. Please feel free to reach out to me, to Holly, because we can get you help, because those are not normal reactions to grief. And there are ways that we can get you help with that. And then I mentioned this earlier, but giving our loved ones permission to practice forgiveness, to say those things that need to be said that have not been so far, but give them permission, letting them know that they have done well and that's their time to rest. I've sat with people that are passing away as part of our 11th hour program at the James L. West Center. And it's being with them, giving them comfort, but letting them know that they've done well. They've done a good job, and now it's their time to go on and to rest. But we might need to allow time for them to resolve differences. People will hold on. If they have things that need to be said, or they still need to hear or talk to somebody, they'll hold on. Okay. Or they'll hold on if we haven't given them permission to let go. So we might need to give them permission and let them know that we'll be okay. This is a list of things to do to take care of yourself. But sometimes it's things that I can start to do to help me work through this grief, but distract myself, because I need to start planning a vacation to move forward. What's my next vacation that I'm going to have? What am I going to journal this week? How am I going to pray or worship or do meditation to help with that spirituality of it? Can I eat something that me and my loved one used to love to eat together? Is it going to get that ice cream and walking through the park? Maybe we did that. Maybe I'm doing it now. I'm doing it. It's just me, but they're there with me. So I'm moving forward with them. He had a gentleman, real quick. I know it's 12:30, but his loved one his wife had passed, and he had moved into a new home, and he was unpacking their boxes of their stuff, and he was intentionally looking at each thing that he unpacked, and it would say, this is not my house now without my wife, but this is the vase that we got when we were married. And I'm intentionally looking at it and placing it here because she's still here with me. This is a photo of us on our anniversary date because she's still here with me, even though it's not our house anymore, it's mine, but she's still with me. So I'm moving forward with her. I hope that makes sense and that helps. I know it's 12:30. I apologize. Went a few minutes over. I will send you out these slides. But I want to, if there are any questions or anything that anybody wants to share, I want to make sure and have that opportunity for you all. So you feel free to unmute, chat it in if there's any questions or anything anybody wants to share. Well, thank y'all. Please be looking for my follow-up email. Probably tomorrow, you'll get it. But you'll get these slides, you'll get information on our upcoming programs. And then this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next several days. I appreciate your time and attention. And we will hopefully see you on another program. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.